I'm ready to surrender into the idea that we're all connected and that I need to be of service somehow.
The way we see things changes them, and the things we see change us. Hey, welcome to the Street Shots Photography Podcast. This is Antonio.
And this is Ward.
And this is episode 212, 212, the area code for New York for the, what are we in? The end of July.
End of July. Wow. Summer half over.
Summer's half over. Then 212 used to be that everybody would kill for that area code. And now I think nobody really cares anymore for that. So I'm not going to, believe me, I'm not going to make the episode title about the zip code or the area code of, I did last time. It's just funny to 212. Yeah. If we ever get to area code 718, if we're ever that shows 718.
Okay.
Anyway.
All right.
Well, hello, Ward. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah. You said you guys are suffering from some smoky conditions up there. Yeah.
It's hot and it's smoky. The hot I'm okay with. The smoky, not so
making
much.
Nice sunrises and sunsets kind of thing, or just like balls floating on the horizon.
It's the big orange balls floating.
Yeah. Excuse me.
I don't know. It's just, you look at the sun and it's, it's not blinding. It's just this big orange thing.
Right. I've taken a picture when we had the smoke conditions last year, or actually when we just have smoke conditions. I've taken the sunrise and then I put it into Lightroom, into the not Lightroom Classic, but Lightroom CC. And I do a search for flags, right? Because I'm looking for flags. It'll bring up that picture because I think it thinks that it's the flag of Japan, because it's a single round red orb in a sort of a bright background, and I was like, no, it's not a flag, it's a sunrise. But well, sorry you're getting all that smoky crap. That's not pleasant.
One day it'll rain. We went through just about 4 weeks without any accumulation of rain. So
yeah,
and the heat it's
summer,
hot.
Yeah. It's summer.
It's summertime.
That's what it used to be. Yeah.
Getting a proper summer. I don't complain about the heat. I don't mind.
I don't complain either. So, I mean, I get hot and slow and don't like sweating, and have to go through multiple shirts in a day, but that's fine. That's just what summer is like. So are you finished with your, what were you shooting these days? What was the last thing you were shooting?
Finished the Calgary Stampede. And this last weekend I went out to my aunt's 90th birthday party.
Oh, okay. And it
was
well.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it did. I'm not much of an event photographer, but I think what I got was pretty good. And there was a couple of artistic shots I got out of it. So
yeah,
it was not, and I created a Smug Mug album and I posted it to the family Facebook group.
That's always fun when you can do that.
Yeah. And people have really appreciated it. So.
And how would you have encapsulated the whole Stampede in terms of how you did? And
my hit rate has definitely come up.
Yeah.
I think.
All right.
And I'm glad I spent the time I did. I spent 8 of the 10 days working down there.
Oh.
And that's 4, 5, 6 hours a day walking up and down.
Yeah. And nobody's paying you to do that. It's just, this is what you're doing. Yeah.
And you're not likely to. No one wants a picture of some strange person on a fairground, up in their living room. So
that's
just for me.
Yeah, that's true. I've noticed that trying to sell street photography in general just does not quite happen. Yeah. So
no.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. So you've got some photographs. I haven't been doing much in the terms of my camera, although I did get a new lens yesterday. Oh, it was one of my,
look at you.
Well, yeah. And I just realized what was it? My Viltrox 56 millimeter doesn't seem to be working anymore. I put it on my cameras and the autofocus, it just grinds away. And it's such an inexpensive lens in the first place. And I was thinking, well, I could go get it repaired, which would probably cost me about the cost of the new lens. Yeah. So I went and I think TT Artisans came out with a new lens for Fuji, and I put that on. and it's really nice.
It's a manual focus, though, isn't it?
No. It's an autofocus. It's
autofocus.
autofocus. No, and it's an f1.8. Sorry, we're talking gear here. So if you can fast forward if you don't want to listen to the gear Fuji talk. But right now, it's a f1.8, and it's sharp, wide open. I mean, it is.
Wow.
It is very, very sharp. It's kind of goofy looking lens, and it doesn't have the aperture ring, which I'm not entirely keen on, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter that much. So, and
Right.
it was about the cost of, I think, a repair on the lens. But I've only taken like 10 pictures with it. And my first picture wasn't of a cat. It was of a sunflower. So, yeah, that was this
Mr.
morning.
Macro.
Yeah. Well, then not macro. It doesn't have a close focus, but it was just walking. I was walking in the coffee shop this morning and saw a person and grabbed them from behind, and I saw a sunflower and I grabbed that and I was like, okay, I got 2 pictures at least, to take a look at, and I brought them in the Lightroom and they look great. So I think it was a good lens. Anyway, enough of the gear. I've been doing more phone photography, and I almost hate to say that because it's like, again, distinguishing between phones and cameras, and I really think there isn't any, but in some way there is,
creative with either.
Yeah. And I'm actually
different itches to scratch.
Yeah. And because I have it with me, like I don't feel like I'm walking out without anything. I can be creative. Mm-hmm. And so, and the macro abilities on the phone are really good because I end up photographing a lot of my pens. I walk around with a lot of fountain pens, and then I post those pictures on Facebook to talk about, ooh, look at this nib and look at this other thing and the ink, the chromatography of this ink. Yeah, I'm geeking out. I'm sorry. Anyway, so yeah, I'm talking too much. We've bantered enough, but wanted to tell everybody we have a guest on the show, my best friend, Gino Miele, and he joined Ward and I. We had a really good chat, and I'm hoping you guys like it.
Yeah, I think the energy in this show is pretty infectious. I think we should enjoy it. I think it's good. It's really good.
It is good, and we'll have Gino on again. So anyway, get prepared to listen to Ward and me and Gino talk photography. Sounds like we're into the talk already, so we're good. But
that's cool.
Well, as a confession, the discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago. So, Ward, I don't know if you know that Gino and I talk via Zoom every Thursday morning when we can. Most of the times we can.
Okay. Well, I kind of gathered you got a standing appointment.
Standing appointment, yeah. And a couple of weekends ago, Gino, I do want you to talk about this, but when we were talking about that class that you went out and photographed the lowriders, that discussion we had prompted our last show, prompted some talk of,
whoa.
Yeah. So the thing that Ward wanted to ask you, what I sent you before, is kind of what we want to follow up on a little bit too. I'm assuming, Ward, I'm speaking for you, but
no, I got your note, but would you tell me a little bit about the last podcast? Cause I haven't listened to it.
Yeah. I'll let Ward go since.
Well, Antonio was trying to get it out of me and was having trouble.
Now's your opportunity to get it out.
Okay. I'm going to just trip over my words. The thrust of it is, if you're going to photograph or have some experience of being somewhere and being with people or in whatever natural environment you're in, are you able to live in 2 worlds, the one of experiencing where you are and who you're with and doing the craft of photography at the same time? Can you live in that split brain world?
Yeah.
And we had two examples. Well, one ran a little bit too long before we decided to shift gears. That was me. One was me doing the street work on the Midway on the fairgrounds at the Calgary Stampede, which is an annual thing that I do that is a through line in my life now, in my creative life, is to go as many days I can in this 10-day fair and photograph the strange people that I see. And it's impromptu, candid grab shots. And, I'm getting better at it. I can feel the craft of it and the competence of it grow a little bit every year. I'm encouraged by that. But for me, the experience of that is just the intense, like doing the actual work. And I'm really only of one mind there. I think we came to that conclusion. The other example was last summer, I went to visit 3 women who I care for a great deal. One, a woman that I worked with early in my career from when I was 19 years old, and I've known her for 40 years. Another woman was my aunt. She's just a little bit older than me. She, married my uncle who was a little bit older. And it was my last visit with her in her care facility before she passed. And then there was my mother. And I did these visits all on one weekend. And so I definitely was in, and I got permission from each of them to photograph them. So I'm sitting on these pictures of my friend Vicky, who I've known for a long time, my aunt Rosemary, who's no longer with us, and my mother, and I photographed her home. I never lived in the home that she lives in. And I was definitely able to be in their company and, oh, by the way, take these pictures. And that was basically the upshot of it, that in certain circumstances you can be in that split mode, and other times you can't, where I'm so looking for, and that was sort of like that when I went to visit Tony in New York. I was definitely on the street and I was just eyes wide open trying to catch everything. And I don't know that I appreciated, I mean, I remember being there and everything, but it was all about the craft, the thing that I was doing. It wasn't about, hey, we'll do this, we'll do that. Yeah. So that was basically what the show was about.
And Gino, when we were talking about your experience with the lowriders and the students, was what sparked that idea, because the sort of remembering that when you're new to this art that we're doing, you're going to be really focused on like you were saying, like capturing this event, right? And rather than stepping back and seeing the whole thing. Like, I don't know, maybe if you want to talk a little bit more about that again, because I really like the way you said that.
Well, I don't know if I can dredge up what I said before.
Right.
But I think what you were saying, Ward, begs a bigger question, which is like, how much am I actually able to pay attention at all these days? Being so addicted to my phone, and with construction workers arriving here at my house, which is a job site, like 7:15 every morning, it means I'm not sitting. Usually, like for years, I've been meditating every morning, and just the last 4 months, no, not so much, because I get up and I'm immediately thrown into sort of this world of construction and choices and management and making sure that they have the fixtures that they need to install and enough tile and all this other stuff. But it's a really interesting question, especially in light of that day that I had when I was visiting with Jennifer Spellman's Santa Fe workshops class, where she had hired a lowrider family to be models. And so I'll tell you about that. But also this thing about the students is what I often try to encourage people who I'm mentoring or teaching to do is to look for the photograph, not for the thing, right? And I think that's a nuance that not everybody gets. I mean, even just saying that, I get the feeling people don't always know what I'm talking about. And so what I was telling Antonio is that I had the feeling that some of these students were just looking to get whatever was there, something that was there, and weren't thinking about even, the difference between standing 3 feet to the left and 3 feet to the right in terms of what the photograph would be. It was just such an exciting subject that they were so caught up in the interesting thing that they weren't necessarily looking to make the interesting picture. Just whatever would happen would be the picture. So I had this really exciting day where Jennifer Spellman, who's taught more workshops than anybody ever for the Santa Fe workshops, and who lives in Santa Fe but is rarely here because she's always in Cuba or San Miguel or in Europe or somewhere leading a workshop, because she's teaching constantly. She and I have been getting to know each other a little bit. And we went to one of the Monday night slideshows at the workshops, because what they do is every week, whoever's teaching that week gives a slideshow that's open to the public. And it's spectacular because the lineup there is really fantastic. And so what I told Reed Callanan, who runs the workshops, is that me and my photo friends from town, who all meet every Monday night to go to this slideshow, it's like the musicians are going to the Blue Note to listen to the other musicians, and I feel like we really get the nuance of, the level of craft that these people are engaged in. But, I saw Jennifer at one of these slideshows, and she said, "Hey, the workshop's hired some lowriders to model for my class tomorrow. And we're going to be up at the Santuario de Chimayo, which is this church with healing dirt in the middle of like lowrider country, because Española, New Mexico, and Chimayo and Los Angeles are like the epicenters of lowrider culture." And so I was like, hell yeah. So I went up there, and to make a long story short, I had a really nice few hours hanging out with her class and with her and helping out a little bit. And, I didn't want to dive right in and start, teaching or anything, because it's not my workshop, and I didn't want to get in the way. So I was just trying to help students. And after a while, it was like, I would see a picture, and then I would be like, okay, you mind if I take a couple of pictures? And it was really sweet. So that few hours was spectacular, because the models, the talent, was a lowrider family. It's like you got mom and dad and 3 teenage daughters, and everybody had their own car. And these young women had been like deep into cars and lowriders in particular since they were babies. And so the whole family dynamic and half a dozen different cars, because they had a friend there also, and the family dynamic, and then the tattoos and the huge eyelashes and like the 67 Chevy Impala, like the whole thing was just great. So I was really happy. And what I explained to Antonio was, with my photographic cup full, I went to go home, and the landscape was just insane. I mean, we're talking about along the high road to Taos, classic northern New Mexico, Sangre de Cristo Mountains to the east, Jemez Mountains to the west, just beautiful mesas and rolling hills and sandstone formations. But the light was crazy. And so I told my wife I'd be home in half an hour. And, I actually got home like 3.5 hours later, because I kept just driving back and forth along this road, chasing the light, because there was this beautiful sort of thing happening and this beautiful sunset, but it just kept escalating. So it went from like, oh, there's really nice light, to, oh, there's really nice light and there's a storm rolling in. Oh, there's really nice light and a storm rolling in, and there's a sunset. Oh, and there's lightning. Oh, there's this really nice light and there's this sunset, and the mountains have this atmospheric perspective, and it's getting better and better, and I'm getting rained on, and oh, there's a rainbow. It's like, oh, there's lightning in the middle of the rainbow. It's like, I was hand holding. And so, I got the rainbow, but I of course didn't get the lightning. But I've been telling everybody that even if I had, nobody would have believed me. It was like lightning in the middle of the rainbow. It was just crazy. So I was by myself, and I'm photographing, and the wind is picking up, and I didn't bring a super wide lens. So I'm shooting this rainbow using my 24 millimeter and shooting panoramic frames left to right to stitch it together later. But I'm just laughing. Like, it was such a spectacle, and I was having such a good time that I'm literally like laughing like a comic book villain. It was just so over the top. And then the moon comes out and starts to set. It was like, it had everything. I was expecting like a unicorn to fly by, or, something. Now, it was just the best day. And then it was the best day multiplied by like 1,000. And I was really aware, to get back to your question, that while I'm standing on this sandstone formation and I'm photographing, that I wasn't 100% present to what was happening, because there's still part of me that's processing, like, fuck, I left the 14 to 24 home. I'm going to have to shoot this 24. Is it going to work? Am I going to stitch it together? Am I going to get anything that does any of this justice? So there are two conversations in my head, right? One is like, oh my God, it's amazing to be alive. It's amazing to be in this place, in this moment. And Antonio, you've often talked about like gifts from the photo gods.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like this was the photo gods being really, really nice to me. So I'm aware of that on the one hand. And on the other hand, I'm also thinking like, what would it be like if I could just be really, as Ram Dass says, here now and only here now? So I keep thinking about that day in the context of the question of like, how present can you be? On the other hand, the camera is also a great way to engage with the world. You know, it's an invitation to look harder and to turn around, right? And see what's behind you. And so,
Well,
that was my immediate response. Yeah.
Well, because you when you're going back to the lowriders and the way you were describing the scene of the family and the like, you could probably write a story about this family from your experience of photographing them. And I'm not want to sound like I'm bashing students or anything like that, because everybody's starting from someplace and they're learning. But you're coming from this, I want to say 10,000 foot view, but you are in a sense two minds. You've got a story to tell about this experience. Not only do you have the photographs, whereas someone who's seeing something for the first time, and what I was talking to Ward about the last time was like the first time I went to Germany with my ex-wife, we went to Heidelberg or something like that, and or anywhere actually, and I was experiencing all these places for the first time, and when I came home, my memories were only the slides that I had. Not, I'm sort of exaggerating in a way, but you know what I mean? It's like I go to someplace new and I'm photographing it, and I'm so enamored by the scenery or whatever I'm seeing that I couldn't tell you a story about Heidelberg. You know what I mean? Or I'm just using that as an example. Whereas you're coming from this experience of meeting a lowrider family, taking pictures when you feel the shot is right, and you've got this experiential story that you're coming up with. So it's sort of an entire package. Whereas people who are getting into this for the first time don't necessarily do that. They're doing like maybe the cataloging, like when you were describing what students are doing. I've seen it too in my classes. It's almost like a cataloging. Like, let me get the stuff so that I have it, right? And then
right. And we all know those photographers who are like, yeah, I need a picture of arches, and I need a picture of Banff, and I need a picture of
the bucket list kind of thing.
Off a list, which has kind of nothing to do with the pictures, and their pictures look like the prototypical pictures from those places, because they're looking for the tripod holes and they think that's what they're trying to do.
Right.
It's funny though that you say that I could tell a story about that family, because that family has been photographed by a guy named Don Usner, Usner, since those girls were little. Don founded a journalistic agency here in New Mexico called Searchlight, which you guys should look up, because even though I live here, I'm just a tourist when it comes to lowrider culture and like even northern New Mexico. I'm a newcomer, but Don Usner has done he did a beautiful book about lowriders. And if you just do a cursory web search, you'll find articles about those girls and that family when they were young, because, Searchlight does stories, like real stories, particularly focused in northern New Mexico. And yes, I could tell a story. I mean, I was there, but what it also brings to mind is how when I teach a workshop here in the summer and the sun doesn't set until 8:30 or 9, I have to really manage students' expectations about like dinner and going home, because I'm not going home. And what I told Antonio was I was surprised that many of the students in that class like sort of felt like they got their pictures of the lowriders and then they wanted to go back to Santa Fe and like go have dinner. And that's when things started to get really nice.
Mm.
And so, I think part of the insanity of, being a photographer is this idea that we're chasing something, right? And that takes the priority when we're in that mode. Like I said, I told my wife I'd be home in half an hour. She was not at all surprised when, I did not appear for hours and hours.
Well,
which is why when we take road trips, it has to be with each other. It can't be with, people who won't understand that, oh, I need to stop by the side of the road and I need to hop that fence and I need to be here for an hour.
You were going to say something more? Sorry.
No, like, talking about the dinner thing. So sort of on a lark, not really on a lark, as I was invited to my aunt's 90th birthday tea that was 2 hours east of here. And, I like to drive and everything. And I didn't really have any intention of stopping along the way or anything, but it was just sort of, my cousin cajoled me into going. And I'm like, oh, by the way, could you bring your camera? Well, sure. I don't really go anywhere without the camera. And so I had this wonderful time of photographing these people who many of them I know very well, family that I see every couple of years. There was about 120 of them, friends of hers from the seniors complex and all that kind of stuff. And it was sort of like, well, my plan was just to go there and then leave at dinner so I could be home here, at a reasonable hour. No. There was a big buffet there, and I sat down and it took me out of photo mode for a while, and I sat and I visited with my cousins, for a couple of hours, and then got back into it. And the great grandkids were getting rambunctious and jumping over the furniture, and I got these wonderful impromptu, like portraity kind of images of them, in the visitor area, draped over the couch,
Yeah.
And that moment would have never happened if I had stuck to my original plan.
Yeah.
First of all, that I went there in the first place, and that I did that the whatever you want to call it, the magnitude of it just kept growing,
right,
as the day went on. And so I feel like I had a 4-day weekend actually after going there, and it was restful, and it was only a 2-hour drive. It wasn't an 8-hour drive. Very often I do 6 and 8-hour drives to visit family, but this time it was just 2, and it was, it was manageable.
I think it was
fantastic.
I think it was Bull Durham where, Kevin Costner said, you got to respect the streak. And it's like, if something's happening, like it's not going to be happening this way again, ever again. It's like, you got to stay in that mode and be grateful. Like, oh, thank you. Like I'm here for this.
I mean, to be fair though, the distraction was Susan Sarandon. So, you really have to weigh that carefully.
I can put myself in like a student's shoes or something like that. Like you're there to experience an entire thing. Like you might be, let's say, to New Mexico for the first time. It's the first time you're seeing lowriders. It's like a first of everything. And you can compartmentalize all these little experiences. Whereas, Gino, you have, some of us, we're in these places where we've been there for a while. We're sort of ensconced in it. And when we can take the time, to sort of, to do that 10,000 foot view or be able to tell the stories and stuff. But so I can sometimes put myself in their shoes, but I always wonder is it like with us, I mean, the three of us are of experience, I should say. And so is that just a matter of experience, or is that something that you can instill into somebody right away, to say, take that step back and look at the whole picture and forget that you're in a new place. And, you might miss some things, but you're going to have a better experience. And I'm not sure if I'm making any sense here, but.
And also just to piggyback on that, Antonio, A question I wanted to ask, both of you, because both of you have been instructors in some form or another for years now. I have seen, like in my Little Beers and Cameras thing that I go to, you see these little epiphanies with people that are new to photography. I remember, I'll never forget, this young woman looked into a twin lens, looked down into the ground glass of a twin lens for the first time, and it was like magic to her. Yeah. It was this bright but laterally reversed the image, and sort of like, how do you use this? And then every now and then you're out on a photo walk, and which we would also do at those little events, and you'd see people making these discoveries. And so I want to know if you've seen these kind of little epiphanies and discoveries when people make a kind of a creative breakthrough, or whatever you want to call it, and where they do kind of turn the corner. They're not just taking inventory of what's going on. They discover kind of an artistic, or at least a craft-based competency, and what that does. And if you kind of feel that positive energy, because I think it's amazing to see people make those discoveries and make those artistic breakthroughs. Sorry, that my question was longer than yours.
I know.
So you describing hanging out with your cousins and it getting better and better, and what I was just saying about this very special day, I think it relates to this in the sense that there can be this feeling, oh my God, something's happening here, right? Like something special is happening right now. And when that woman looked through the twin lens, or when somebody has a breakthrough, like there is an energy to it. And I think it's not necessarily about the photography. It's not necessarily about paying attention, but there is something about connecting up the act of photographing and being in your body and being aware that something special is happening right now, and that this moment has this tremendous potential, or that something just changed. And that's the magic that I'm chasing. And whether photography is involved is just a bonus. Like I'm chasing those special feelings, those special, I don't want to say moments because it's really hackneyed that you capture the moment in a photograph. But I will say that the photographs that I decide are good enough to share, I feel like I choose them based on whether they have even some little bit of that energy of something's happening here, something special,
And do you think that's just a result of experience, or because we've been doing it for so long that we've sort of evolved into this? Or is that something, I'm not saying we got the special sauce sprinkled on us or something like that, but do you know what I mean? It's because, when I come across students, I don't have them for as long as you do, Gino, because you'll have a workshop and so you'll be there with them for a week or some extended amount of time. And generally my classes are 2 or 3 hours and I don't see the people again. And so my little breakthroughs are, I think, a little bit far in between. I mean, they happen sometimes. So I have to try to squeeze in, as much as I can to them. And when I do see a breakthrough, it's like if someone did pick something up or crosses that line, from recording to experiential or something like that, it happens. And it is magic to see wow, you got that from when you walked in the door, you didn't have that, and then when you came out in 3 hours, you got a little bit you can see the doors opening in that direction. That is pretty exciting. And so that kind of makes me think, maybe I'm answering my own question here, but maybe that makes me think that it's not an experience thing. It's not like we've got to be being photographers for 30 years to get this. Maybe it's something else. So I don't know, Gino, if you can add to that or whatever. But.
So I think you are answering your own question, and I would like to add to that. And what this makes me think about is how, I've driven down 1,000 back roads where there were no photographs. You go out and it's like fishing or playing golf, or, you keep coming back because every time has the potential for, that big fish or that hole in one. And so what I think is, even though I haven't been meditating much the last few months, the photography is a practice that I've been doing for, God, like 40 years. And so you're engaged in the practice, and sometimes it's just like nothing. But if you keep doing it, you increase the odds that something magical will happen because you keep showing up again and again. And I think it's the same for students. It's like, you know, they go to a class, or they come to a workshop, or they decide they're going to photograph every day. And I think the photo gods reward that. You know, they reward that willingness to spend the time.
That's interesting. As you were saying the photo gods, I was thinking, how do you sacrifice to the photo gods these days? Because way back when, your sacrifice would be like by accident, you open up the back of your camera and expose a roll of film. There's your sacrifice for the day. This is really interesting because I was just talking today earlier to my friend Geraldine, who Gino, you know, in France, and she teaches art in a private school uptown New York. So she's getting ready to getting our lessons together. And she actually teaches a broad range of ages in the school. But something that she said caught my ear in the sense of, like, her class is sort of a respite in a way from all the other pressures that the students have in their other classes, right? So she has to make an environment a little bit, at least initially when the classes start again, for the kids to sort of relax and get back into, you know, doing their art or whatever the projects are. And she said something about, what did she say? Oh, doing mark making, which I sort of interpreted as doodling, but not like, because doodling feels mindless, but mark making was intentional. But the idea of making mistakes, like give them these opportunities so that there's no pressure on them to make mistakes, like do all the mistakes, get all the stuff out, you know, draw however you're going to do it. It doesn't matter if the proportions are right. It doesn't matter if anything, like get those mistakes out. And I was wondering about how to like get that into a photography class, because I always think that when you're a student or you're taking a workshop, there's pressure, right? You spent this money, you're taking time, you're doing all this under, you know, someone's watching over you and whatever. And so and then maybe there's a peer pressure as well, because you're with other people, and how to then loosen that tightness that they come in with, that tension. And like, what would be the equivalent of making photo mistakes? Like, okay, like, well, you know, we're going to take a certain amount of time. It might work better in a longer term class, as I only have 3 hours, but I want to figure out how to do it in a small class too. Like, how do you take the pressure away from a student's where when you do the mistakes is where sometimes you find the creativity, right? Like if we're, you know, I'm so, and I throw myself into this as well, because sometimes I go out even now taking pictures and I make sure it's in focus. I make sure I'm holding the camera right. I'm making sure my shutter speed is right, you know, and it's become sort of this unconscious thing that I'm doing. And therefore I don't do a lot of mistakes. And therefore my photography sometimes feels like I haven't gone anywhere. And how to switch that around a little. And I'm not sure since we're all here together and we're sort of exploring this, I thought it would be a good place to bounce that off of you guys.
Ward, what's the name of the fair that you go to that you've been going for 10 years?
The Calgary Stampede.
So what's the feeling you have when you go? Like, okay, I'm going to go to the Calgary Stampede tonight and I'm going to go for the next 10 days. It's like, what's the feeling? Is there anything like parallel to it, or how would you describe it?
I often describe it to my American friends as like a big state fair that has a rodeo, has a big concrete grandstand that seats about 25,000 people. They can watch this rodeo happen. So there's that, and that's on the midway on the you know and there's rides and carnies and all that sort of thing. So what I feel like as a human, as a person, is it's a big tourist thing. It's our biggest tourist thing of the year. I feel like a host. I help people on the train and on the grounds. They need directions. And when I find out, I'm trying to be as helpful as I can. I feel like I'm participating in the culture of the city. I'm also participating in the culture of Western North America, basically this Western cowboy hats and boots and all that stuff. Although I don't wear any of that stuff. I think cowboy hat is part of a uniform for people who actually live on ranches and do that. And my cousins actually are that. So it's for me, it's not for me to wear a cowboy hat. But I go down there and I have this kind of host mentality when I'm not photographing. When I'm photographing, it's about the diversity and joy and interest and just the diversity of humanity that I'm trying to capture there. And I'm trying to be Winogrand, and I'm trying to be I'm trying to be Meyerowitz, and there's a whole bunch of things. I feel like I'm participating in the history, or trying to participate in the history of photography from my quarter of the continent. And there's about half a dozen of us that kind of cover it, and our styles are so different, and it's so wonderful because we all got our different shtick. I'm a largely black and white, and those guys are doing colorful and cotton candy and lights at night and Ferris wheels and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like at street level with black and white, kind of starkish image, bright daylight, that sort of thing. And so there's a joy, the creative joy, comes out from that. Yeah.
And I could feel that from you, especially when you started talking about the other photographers who were there and sort of like the camaraderie and the fellowship. And the reason I ask in the wake of what you were asking, Antonio, is because I think my answer to the question is like, it's playtime. It's like I get to play. And I think adults in our culture, they don't play a lot. I mean, there's sports, but that has a really competitive aspect to it. Although photography does also in some
no,
ways.
It doesn't.
but the way that I try to create an environment in a workshop is by making it safe for everybody to be friends and to go out playing together. Like, oh, let's all get in the car and go someplace and go play and have a picnic, and like, let's experiment and sit in front of the computer and play with Lightroom or Photoshop and see what develops and see what kind of fun we can have, the same way like a bunch of kids would sit with a bunch of crayons. And I think that playfulness gives permission for what you call mistakes, or for discovery, or for some kind of magic to happen. I mean, I realize that I've been using photography as an excuse, not only for myself, but in my teaching, an excuse to experiment with intuition and playfulness and using your body as a gauge of what's working and what's not, and where you should follow, and like all this other really cool stuff. I mean, it's like the photography is an excuse to be embodied and playful and creative.
It gives you that permission to be present. You often can't be distracted while you're shooting. I mean, you can, but I think in order to be, to get what you want successfully as much as possible, you have to be present. I was think, the sort of the cliche thing about photography being a meditation as well. I mean, you go out and you're constricting yourself too. Your world is narrowed down to this little window and these pieces of glass and plastic that you have hanging around your neck. And how do you make yourself present by like your vision and being conduit through this device into the world,
Yeah. I wonder, like, how present do you think Gary Winogrand was, when he was photographing? I think he was definitely playful, but he shot so much. I mean, he was spending so much time with that camera in front of his face, between him and the world. Like, we'll never know whether it made him more present or whether it was like,
that's a good question, actually. Yeah.
In his, whether he was in the conversation in his head. I'm also really curious what you guys think about. I mean, I often draw the analogy between photography and listening. And I think that relates to what you're talking about in terms of presence. It's like, the more I can listen, the more I can receive rather than try to impose, I think the better the pictures are.
Can you?
Well, it's certainly true of a moving crowd. And when you're shooting a moving crowd, like you have to be, well, for me, I am wide awake. I don't think I'm any more focused, as it were, than trying to find arrangements, aesthetic arrangements of people, of these people as they're moving, as I'm moving.
Yeah.
And I shoot from the hip most of the time not because I'm trying, well, I am trying to be sneaky, but part of it is I like to shoot from below because there's some of my pictures, it's very heroic. Like the poses end up being kind of heroic because you're shooting them from beneath, and they're sort of like they're the constructivist art where they're like, looking to tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of thing, right?
That's also the perspective that children have of the world. So, it's not
right.
just, yeah.
Wow. That's a really good connection. And I always talk about that. It's one of the interesting things in my class. What I started doing recently was introducing the idea of point of view to the students. And they like, what are you talking about? I'm like, think about this, when you shoot down on somebody, when you shoot equal to somebody, when you shoot from below at somebody, and there's a little bit of, discovery when they hear that. There's this, I didn't realize. Anyway, sorry, just like
right. And then there's also what our late great friend Mel DiGiacomo called the vocabulary of lenses. How every lens has its own voice, its own vocabulary. But Ward, I want to go back to what you were saying about photographing crowds and everything moving. It's like this 3D puzzle. Like what I'm imagining is you're looking for the configuration of people, background, lights, the light, and all this other stuff, but you're also moving your body. And so you have to be aware of whether you're going to walk into somebody, whether you're going to step on something, whether you're going to trip over a trash can or
stop walking because there aren't enough people coming. So I'll wait. Yeah. I'll go off to the side. Okay, there's another clutch of people coming. All right, let's start up.
But it's this great exercise in expanded awareness. Like how many variables can you be aware of at once? Moving your own body and these other moving bodies and the light and the focus and the exposure and, the relationship of the subject to the background. And it's like when you can really be aware of like everything that's happening, that's really paying attention. That's really being present. Even if you're sort of caught up in the act of photographing, I still think that's a really present way to be.
Yeah, and I think that's what Winogrand, he said what he really wanted was not to exist. And in those moments, you feel like you're in the pictures where I have this feeling like I got it. I don't really, I'm not much of a celebrator, but every now and then when I shoot something and I don't chimp that much when I'm walking up and down the midway, but there are these times like, it was sort of like, well, it's kind of corny, but you feel like kind of all your experience had kind of led to, I felt like that way about actually the trip to New York. All your experience to that point has got you to this photograph. If I hadn't done these hours or these miles on my feet, I would not have been, this picture would not have been possible.
Or if I hadn't just decided to get my butt up to visit with Jennifer's class, I would have been in the house, not out in the landscape when this stuff happened. And I never would have even known that it happened. But this idea of disappearing, that's really interesting because Zen Buddhists talk about this. The idea of the person of the personness just disappearing and just being pure awareness. But back when I was in my 20s and single, I spent a lot of time at a bar in Manhattan called the Bleecker Street Bar. And I used to go there and I had a whole group of friends who were regulars there. And I would go there and play darts and drink beer. And that was like pretty nice part of life in my 20s. But I met a guy there who I became friends with, a photographer named Ezio Peterson, who shot for AP. And Ezio was the prototypical photojournalist. And so because of that, there was just lightning outside my house. I just saw it out my window. Because Ezio had the background that he had, it was all available light. And he had an assignment where he wanted to light a room where a bunch of people were going to be meeting. And he asked me, since he knew that I had experience with strobes, he asked me if I would bring my kit and light that room for him and just set it up and let him shoot. And so, of course, I did that. And I went and I set up a bunch of strobes, and the most amazing thing happened. Like, Ezio started to photograph, and maybe 3 or 5 or 7 minutes in, he disappeared. Like, the people in the room became completely unaware of him and just were themselves. And it was like a superpower. Like, this happened, I don't know, 35 years ago. And I still remember it because it was so incredible. It was like he had this ability to do just what you're talking about.
Mel had that too, I think.
I think he did.
Mel did. Well, remember he photographed my first wedding, right? Yeah. And
which my photographs are amazing.
My sister's wedding.
Man.
Oh, he did Julia's wedding? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Unfortunately, I don't think she ever got the prints or the negatives because the photographs were so unusual that she was like,
right,
she didn't really know what to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he could disappear or he could fill up. He could either disappear or fill up the room completely.
Right. It was both. Yeah. That disappearing, it almost sounds like, well, going back to your experience with the lowriders, that you were doing the same. Like, you would appear and then disappear.
Yeah.
In your challenge to photograph the something that was new to you.
And I think that's another awareness of, like, sort of how you're affecting the situation you're photographing and what the dynamic is with the people. But I just want to say, it's funny. I'm remembering that the last time I was on the podcast, I had also just photographed a bunch of lowriders. And I think that's an interesting synchronicity. The other thing is, I hope you'll put Melchiorre Di Giacomo's name in the show notes so people who don't know his work can discover him. And it's sad that he just died a couple months ago, and I miss him.
Yeah, we did talk about him after he died. We did a little tribute, and of course I put up the pictures from the wedding, because that's well. Also, I had realized. Remember that I'm doing all these photographs of dilapidated chairs and stuff like that.
Yes.
Do you remember that I had one of his prints of a discarded chair on our wall in my old apartment?
It was an upholstered, stuffed chair.
Right.
Yes.
And so I'd always wondered, and I already talked about this before, but I'll talk about it with you now here. But after he died, I was like, I just got some of his prints. And then I went and looked in some prints that were on the floor here. And I was like, the chair. And I was like, I wondered if that chair permeated into my like photo DNA and got me into thinking about doing, every time I see a thrown away chair, it has to be a certain kind of chair too. So, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to, can you guys hear the thunder in the background? Like, there's a light storm brewing, and I'm sitting in my studio looking out the window, which is behind the computer monitor, and I've seen lightning twice.
Oh,
and it's this is a crazy, magical place to live. I've seen like 4 rainbows in the last month, and lightning storms are really common in the summer. And one of my students in the last workshop, we were out in the field photographing together, and we passed by this place, and I told them a story about how I had stopped at this particular place with a bunch of students years ago, and there was a lightning storm, and I was encouraging them all to get their tripods and, to do a long exposure, and like, that's how you're going to get the lightning, and you're not going to be able to just handhold and click, I got it. And of course, this woman walks over to me and she goes, "Look, I got it." She had just held the camera up to her face and got this perfect shot of lightning. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And that's the kind of magic that, makes it all worthwhile. But the student in the most recent workshop, I was telling this story, and I explained that, either you could do a really long exposure on a tripod, or you can get a trigger And she was like, what's that? And so literally the day after the workshop, she went out and she bought a trigger. And 2 days later, she sent me a picture of lightning that was beautiful. And so those are the kind of breakthroughs that I think that you were talking about, Ward, where it's like, just helping people realize what's possible. And again, I think it really helped her to have a playful and satisfying experience. It's like, oh, a lightning trigger, that would be a really fun thing to play with.
Yeah. I think
she's got me wanting to go out and buy one.
Right. Was it that Pluto? Was it called Pluto?
I don't know if it was Pluto or Myops or
Myops is the other one. Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah. As you're saying that, well, first of all, what's the workshop? What was the
lightning?
That was the workshop. More lightning. There's a good workshop.
The workshop was called The New Mexico Landscape and Lightroom. And so the title is always an excuse, but this is an excuse to go out to Ghost Ranch or out into the landscape or just, to some of the really nice little local spots that I know and spend half the time out shooting and the other half the time like introducing people to how to transform their photographs in Lightroom. And so the focus was not at all on image management or importing or the logistics. It was really super focused on post-processing and taking a great raw file and making it amazing. The analogy I often use is like, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to mine rough diamonds. Then we're going to take those rough diamonds back and we're going to cut, polish, facet them, and maybe even mount them.
Do your students already come with the sort of expectation that processing, I mean, obviously they're coming for Lightroom, but they're skilled enough to know that processing is an inherent part of the whole image making process, right? Like it's as equal to, or no, or do they not?
It always surprises me that people choose my class not knowing that, I think post-processing is at least 50% of what it is. And so I often end up with a couple of students who sadly believe in reality and think that there should be like a strong correlation between what's happening in front of the lens and the picture you make later. And their goal is to make it as much like the thing that happened as they can. And it's really fun to give those people permission to go further than that. And sometimes that's the light bulb going on. It's like, oh, I can actually be a little bit of a fiction writer rather than a nonfiction writer.
Yes, I remember I always quote you about that, the fiction photographer. Yeah. I've had to use that a couple of times because in my class I had a few people who were saying that occasionally, and it's probably one of the best lines I think ever, short of like a line from The Odd Couple, right?
So how do you go ahead?
Well,
sorry.
No, I was going to say, like, remembering you said that to me is like the perfect way to sort of, I don't know, it's to quench that misnomer that a photograph is the way it comes out of the camera. And I said, well, if you're doing photojournalism, sure, it probably has to be that way. Everything else is open to interpretation. And I did have one student who was like, well, but I don't like when someone does Photoshop on the picture. And then I said to them, well, think of that as, do you get angry at people who write novels? And she was like, no. And I quote you on that. It's like the best. It's definitely one of the best things to go in with. So yeah, anyway, sorry, you were going to say something too, but.
No, I was going to ask you guys, I've had the experience of people saying to me, I don't like to do too much to the picture. And it's like, I'm looking at the picture and it's like the tonal range is really flat. And, it's like, even if you did a little, you could do a lot. But I'm curious, how you guys respond to that. And I also just wanted to mention, that part of that whole fiction writer thing came from years ago when I was still doing darkroom work, pre-digital, I had this great composite landscape where I had sandwiched two negatives together in the enlarger. And it was one of my favorite pictures. And I had a print on the wall, and my very beautiful German cousin, like, discovered that it wasn't a real photograph. And she got really angry with me. And it was so surprising, because she had sort of fallen for the cultural myth that, the camera never lies. So I don't know if you guys want to respond to either of those two things. I think that's fun.
Well, go ahead. I've been talking too much. Where do you go?
Well, no, I wrote a blog article like 8 years ago on my website about a guy I used to work with who said the only picture you can get, or you should produce, are ones where you click the perfect image. And I remember in popular photography, there used to be a spread called Straight Shot, Believe It or Not, which was usually some color slide, right? And so, oh, this is look at all the planets came together to give us this beautiful picture, right? And there was a kind of I don't know if it was a humorous tone or a mocking tone in the magazine about it, like, it was not studio, it was some sunset over some field or something. But, I'm thinking of people I've had the conversation with who are newer to photography, that it's not just a discovery, and that the analogy I use is clay, right? Or Ansel Adams, and I mentioned it in the last podcast too, about the negative being the score and the print being the performance, right? Photography is a creative act. When we were in the darkroom, we did whatever we could, adjusted the contrast and the exposure to cover over or fix our mistakes, but also to make it what the feeling you had, the emotional impact it had when you were shooting it. And that is the reason, or to make it at least that. Sometimes you can magnify that and make it more emotional than what you were feeling at the moment of exposure.
But also, different writers have different styles. Different painters have different styles. Yeah. Movie makers have different styles. Yeah. It's so funny that there's this persistent idea. But what I really love when people say things like, I don't believe in Photoshop, it's really fun to point them in the direction of Gustave Le Gray or Henry Robinson,
Yeah, actually, and I did that in the last class. I brought up Gustave Le Gray. I mean, these students don't know anything about photo history, but I was like, this guy in the 1800s did this thing, and it was his version of Photoshop. And the woman was like, her jaw was open. I'm like, yeah, people have been doing it forever. I think to answer your question, also, Gino, was that when I photograph sunrises out of my window, because they're beautiful, and I'm never satisfied with what comes out of the camera anyway, and the camera's processing it as well, so there's no reality in either the camera, and then there's me adding to it, and inevitably I'll put it up on maybe my local Facebook group, because I like sharing my sunrises with people in the neighborhood. It's a fun thing. And then eventually I'll get somebody who says, it didn't really look like that, did it? And that's often where there's a stuck part of me saying, well, if I'm going to answer this person in a factual way, I have to say, no, it didn't, but I always say, like, no, but it looked like that to me. Like, this is how I see the world. And that's what photography is not necessarily me showing you the reality of things, because how boring is that? I need to show you how I'm going to see something and how I experience it. And that's the whole point. And so, Ward, I was going to say, when you do process, like your processing on your black and white pictures is very, very much your style. Like if I'm scrolling through a feed or something like that, and I'm not looking at the names, and I see a black and white picture, I can tell that it's yours because of the work that you've done on it. You've brought in detail, and you've moved detail away, and you've done these things that's very much your signature. And that, I think, is incredibly important to have. You're talking about Mel with the language of lenses. We have that same language with the post-processing of a picture. It's the finishing of the sentences,
You can tell that it's Ward's, but the question is, can you tell what valley he shot it in and what year the vintage was?
What do you mean? Like, no, just like, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I mean, that's a fun game to play is, yeah. So this idea of the straight shot, believe it or not, what I realized just a couple of weeks ago is that a lot of the pictures I've made in the last couple of months that I really like are quote unquote straight photographs. I mean, because of the same thing that you were talking about, Antonio, with the sunset, like over the years, I've gravitated more and more towards composites because they feel fuller to me. Like I can make a picture that has what my friend Ruben calls, it's got that second beat. It's not just a one note picture. It's got bump, bump, or better yet, like bump, bump, bump. It's got like a couple of notes rather than just that single note that falls flat. But it's been a nice surprise to realize I've made a lot of photographs that I like that are single frame, like pretty great with not a lot of post-processing. And that's, I'm listening to that and saying, oh, is this like sort of a new development, something I should pay attention to the pattern recognition of? Yeah.
Good question. Yeah. Wow. And since you're doing all this construction, you're not getting out, you're doing most of your shooting during workshops, or you're going out sometimes on your own or with a, road trip or stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I did a couple of road trips. I mean, I went to Antelope Canyon with a couple of friends, and that's like a whole other podcast.
Yeah, okay.
The reality of that experience being crammed into this slot canyon with 20 minutes to shoot with 100 other people in there, compared to the serene photographs of the sandstone formations that everybody comes up with. I was like totally unprepared for the reality of it.
Yeah, so I've got a little aside on that. So my wife and I went there in 2019. She got better pictures out of her iPhone than I got out of my Fuji gear. I had a cousin this weekend saying, I saw Marcy's pictures. I want to find print.
Yeah.
So I'm going back through her phone library to put together, the color image of hers to make a fine print for my cousin. So it was like,
it makes sense. I mean, the exposure conditions in there are heinous, and
horrible.
The phone does a great job opening up the shadows and controlling the highlights automatically. And
yeah. I've actually been having a good time with my phone lately as well, rather than carrying my camera around with me. Because when I go to breakfast at Blue Star, I'm now carrying a big bag with me with all my writing stuff because I'm doing all this. So I schlep all this, like my pens and my papers. I'm already carrying a bunch of stuff. I'm like, so I want to carry my camera. I'm like, no. So, the phone is becoming certainly something that I'm appreciating a lot more, and, using it as that tool. And I think a bunch of pictures I just put up recently, I don't know where I put them up, but probably on Facebook. Oh, you saw them, the stuff, all that stuff, that last batch of stuff, those were all phone pictures. I didn't mention, in the,
and we shouldn't,
right? We shouldn't. It's like, it doesn't matter, but it's this idea that
interesting though. I mean, like, again, Jennifer Spellman, who I mentioned a couple of times, and I'd love it if you put a link in for her in the show notes. I was really shocked to discover that she only shoots with her phone. And she said there's like a freedom to it that she really, really likes. And that was really surprising.
It's funny that phrase comes up. I was, a photographer, Jack Hollingsworth.
I know his name.
Yeah, he's also was an instructor. I think he still is. But he posts up I think he's gone totally iPhone, and he posted something today. And it was a lot of really great pictures. I mean, just the photography was really nice. And I know he's just doing phones. And I realized what I said to him, this means freedom, like having that ability to not worry about the gear or something like that. Like you just are again, funneling the world through this device, your vision, and then you're ending up again, and it doesn't matter what you're using.
But Ansel Adams said the most important part of the camera is the 6 inches.
6 inches behind you. Yeah.
I mean, Dan Burkholder's iPhone pictures are just phenomenal.
Oh, I haven't seen his stuff in a while. Is he still doing his iPhone stuff?
Well, he shoots with an Olympus also, I think, and there's all kinds of fun stuff with that. But mostly his prints are relatively small, and he often does, like gold leaf over vellum inkjet with platinum, all this stuff. And so because they're small, like the phone is awesome.
Yeah.
I was in a
Calgary that does the same thing with the gold leaf and the vellum. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Really? Gold leaf and vellum? Yeah. Explain that a little bit if you can. Do you know what?
Trying to remember. So he does I believe, he prints on the vellum, and then he has, I've forgotten. I'll dig it up. I'll find his name.
It's just such a, like vellum and gold leaf is like, what the hell is?
Well, it's like it's sandwiched. Like it's sort of like, so instead of the darker part of the image being like inkjet, it's gold. So when it folds together, you have this kind of almost ethereal 3-dimensional effect of this gold
on this translucent
translucent media. Yeah.
And you could do it with inkjet or with traditional wet processes or some combination of both registering. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. I want to come back to the phone just for a second because I went out for the day with a couple of friends shooting, and we had a really nice time. It was fun. And I ended up at this place where there was a little waterfall, and I was delighted to discover, I was at this place with Adam Forgash, this place is about an hour from here. I was at this place with Adam Forgash maybe 25 years ago, and I made a photograph with my Mamiya 645 that was a long exposure waterfall picture that I had printed and exhibited and sort of stood the test of time. And I was like, oh, this is where that was. It was like I was rediscovering this place. But, the light wasn't really super great to photograph a waterfall. It was the middle of the day, daylight, and, no tripod, no neutral density filter. But I shot it with my phone in live mode and then did the fake long exposure thing and converted it to black and white. And it was beautiful. And it was so fun to discover that. And then I made another discovery. I was like, even after all that processing, you could still put your finger on it and the water would run. And it was like, it was so cool. It was like a Harry Potter picture.
I think that's where it came from, right?
Yeah.
2 or 3 seconds of animation to show the people looking around a little bit and then stop. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where it came from. So that's,
I got a siren going by here, so I'm going to let it go.
No. Well, I was going to say too, with my experience with the iPhone now, that our daughter's gone to Japan for a couple of years and we have her dog. And so we're walking this dog, and I'm not going to carry around my Fuji gear. I have my phone with me all the time anyway. So the part of the city that we live in, we're quite up high above, we're 800 feet above the river actually. So we can see the weather come down the river valley. And so I've started taking pictures of the clouds. The mountains are 70 miles away. They're a little bit distant, but they're there. They can be part of the horizon when it's not too humid or smoky. So yeah, and I've started doing equivalents now. I'm Stiglitz. The cloud's got some texture to it. Then I'll take this picture of completely filled with a cloud pattern and posting those. It's just interesting and fun and freedom, and free. It's a lot of fun. And
it's the freedom. It's the freedom part
that's the rest. Then, yeah.
Well,
no, it's great.
I'm gonna sort of say that let's put a pause on this and come back because we're at time. So
I want to add a little coda before we do this.
Yes.
There's a student friend who came to me last week and said that he wanted help, and he wanted help not with shooting or post-processing or anything technical. He was like, I want help figuring out what the pictures are for. And it really kind of threw me for a loop. It's like, what am I going to do with my pictures? What are they for? Why am I making these? And where am I going to put them? And I sort of thought about it for a while. And of course, there are many, many answers, and maybe I'll be able to sort of help him process this question. But the best answer I came up with is, I know all these people who play guitar, and the reason they play guitar is to play guitar. It's like this brings us back to what we were talking about earlier with play, and with this, this childlike mind. And so why is it that he even thinks there has to be something he has to do with them, rather than making them for his own pleasure or for the sake of making them?
Taking pictures for the act of just taking pictures, which is what I think Gary Winogrand sometimes was doing, because
right, to see what they look like photographed.
Right. Yeah. And he left us with so much. I'm
definitely in that camp, but I have, I look over the years of how I think my work has gotten better. I like the feeling that it gives me. I mean, I like just about every aspect of photography, from the excitement of going out to do something, even if it's crap, whatever I'm going to create and the weather's bad and nothing works, to going out, the physical act of shooting, the thinginess and the materialistic comfort of having this heavy gear that you're carting around, using your body and eyes to see what you're seeing, and to capture that. And my wife's after me all the time. If even I come home late, I'm uploading onto the computer, and I'm going to be there till 1 a.m. doing some post-processing. I just got to get 5 or 6 out. I just want to get 5 or 6 out, and maybe post one to social media. The whole, like, I'm driven to do it. And so, for me, the philosophical aspect is I'm doing it. The reason why I'm doing it is to do it, is the act of doing it. And yes, I get these spikes of enjoyment and dopamine as I go. And then I can look back at any time. If I have to stop photography because of health or whatever, I can already look back at the work that I've collected up to now and have some bit of pride and interest and something to show somebody else, or legacy, or whatever you want to use, big ass words like that. There's that. This is the thing I like to do. Oh, what does Ward do? Oh, this is his hobby. This is what he does.
This is funny, Ward, because it brings us back to Vivian Maier. I mean, you're going to go to the show tomorrow, Antonio, but it's like, she didn't even want anybody to see her pictures. Mm-hmm. And look how magnificent that work was. And we can only imagine, like, why she did it or how it made her feel. But I think we can imagine.
And how many more Vivian Maiers are out there this day? So
yeah,
think about that. Cool. Wow. Gino, I don't know how to express my thanks to you so much for agreeing to hang out with us tonight for so long.
My pleasure. I mean, this is just what we were talking about. It's like hanging out with my friends and playing a little bit.
Right. And talking about the stuff that we love to talk about. So I really appreciate it. Where are we finding you in the world here? Where is the best way to hook up with your stuff?
At Gene _Miele, JEAN_MIELE on Instagram, although I certainly don't post nearly enough. And my website is genemiele.com, JEANMIELE.
Cool. And you got workshops coming up in Santa Fe?
Nope.
Oh, we're done for the summer, eh?
We're done for the summer, and I'm always open to the idea of people coming out to Santa Fe and us doing a little mini workshop out in the desert. That's kind of the really fun thing I'm doing these days.
We got to sign up. Come on in.
Oh yeah, fellas, come on out.
Airfare. We'll converge. We got to go to South Dakota and we got to go to New Mexico, man.
Right.
We got these trips.
The Dakotas yeah, well, I mean, that's a long drive, but the Dakotas are 2 of the 6 states that I haven't been in yet. So, I'd consider that too. But, Yeah, I'm not working too hard these days, honestly. And
you got your house to take care of and build and move back into. So
I just wanted to thank you, Ward. Also, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure too.
What about me?
You guys talk every week.
Talk every week, right?
It goes without saying. You're one of my best friends. Yeah.
I like talking to Ward too. He's got one of those. He's got that good voice for radio. So
yeah, he's got the ASMR.
I got the face for radio too.
All right. Well, have a good night, and we'll get you on again, and for sure. This is great. This is an hour and a half.
Be well.
All right.